Well, good morning, everybody. Chuck Hyde here, Vistage Chair in Northwest Arkansas, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Dan Barnett. Dan is a friend from Vistage, and we'll get into his background a little bit. But today, it's about execution. And if there's a topic that's a now more than ever kind of topic, I think execution is among that list, right, Dan? So good morning, welcome, and how are you doing this morning?
I am doing well. And I want to thank you for inviting me to be here. And I'd like to welcome you to my office. And you can see my workout room as well today. Here at beautiful Lake Tahoe. So it's a beautiful day out here today. It looks like it's beautiful where you are too.
We are having a gorgeous day, and I hope to be out on my bicycle later this afternoon. For those of you that don't know Dan has headed companies for some of the world's leading corporations, companies you're going to know and recognize, like Nestle, Pillsbury, Weyerhaeuser, Constellation Brands. He's also run a number of private companies, smaller private companies. He's currently CEO and owner of the Primavera Company, which is focused on regional banks, restaurants, and real estate. He has a global consulting and speaking business. From a Vistage connection, I love this, that he understands Vistage really well because he was once COO of Vistage Worldwide for 7 years. And then, you know, Dan, you contribute to CNBC, to Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, and now you're kind of hitting the big time with Vistage Northwest Arkansas. So congratulations as you continue to expand that expertise out. Dan spoke to our groups back in August of 2019, and today he's coming, as he said, to us just north of Lake Tahoe on Incline Village, Nevada. And so I tell you, I've not been out there, Dan, but I've seen it on the web, and man, it's got to be beautiful. But I want to start, how are you personally? How's your family? How are things for your business and all the things that we're experiencing right now with COVID-19?
Yeah, things are going really well for me. I'm able to do my speaking remotely, and so I'm like the thing we're doing right now. So it's really not having a big impact on me personally, my family as well. We've been fortunate that way. And so, yeah, things are going fine for me.
I'm glad to hear that. It's something that I think is so important that we continue to ask and not take for granted, right, how things are going for folks. I want to do something with you, Dan, from the start that I did with Gustavo Grodnitsky, and that was to play back two big ideas, two quotes that you had shared with us when you were with us back in August. And I'd like your take on these, particularly in the context of these two black swan events of COVID-19 and oil prices, what they've been doing, and how they've had really an extraordinary impact on our businesses right now. And the two quotes are these: no vision too distant, no detail too small. And the second is that the best leaders don't micromanage. In fact, they're head in, but hands out. Okay, so what's the application? What's that looking like? Has it changed at all? Or what's that look like in where we find ourselves right now?
Well, what I have found with the best leaders that I've met and worked with, they have this combination of being able to understand clearly where they're going. I think all good performance starts with clear direction. All right, and there's no vision too distant. These are leaders that can bring a vision to their organization that's clear, that's specific, that's measurable. People look at it and they go, you know, that is really cool. I'd like to be a part of that. They're just good at that. And some leaders are really good at that, and these leaders are. But they also have this other characteristics, and you rarely see this in the same person, where they can also say, this is what we have to do to get there. Make that just as clear and just as compelling as where they're going. And when you see that combination in an organization, in my experience, it raises the level of energy and the level of play tremendously. Because first of all, people like to know where they're going. They like to know they're doing something that makes a difference. And when you make that clear to them, it raises the level of energy in your organization. But they also figure that if you as a leader, if you know what needs to get done to get there, you're going to make some pretty good decisions about resources and things like that. Not only that, but you're going to recognize when a good job is being done. And that's a combination you don't often see in the same person. But I find the best leaders tend to be able to have that.
Yeah, that duality, that complementary focus that I think that you're talking about is huge. And what I've been hearing a lot, I mean, you know, let's wind back. I mean, it's almost May. By the time this is out there, it'll be May.
Yeah.
In mid-March, vision was about maybe survival. Like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Like, oh, whatever vision we thought we had was at least being challenged, if not completely torched. But as we've kind of come through, we got past the next 24, 72 hours, the next week, and now we're starting to think on a bit different horizon. But it's not, a 3-year vision, maybe like we were talking about, in January, February, or when certainly late last year. How do these two concepts particularly play out when we're trying to think, okay, how far does vision extend, and when there's so much the pace of change, the cycle of change, and the cycle of new information? How do those two things play out particularly then, Dan?
So when you think about it, someday this is going to move on. All right. The world's going to go back to, it's going to be different. It's going to go back to someplace. And do you know what victory looks like for you? Do you know what you really want to accomplish? All right. So don't let go of that. Make sure people know this is what it's going to look like in the future. And I say make it clear and specific and measurable. Because if you can make it measurable, you can show progress towards it, which builds that confidence and energy. And so make sure people understand, look, we're going to come through this. And when we come through this, it's going to look like this. We will make it. This is what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Once we get through it. So make sure people know what's in it for them. It is what's in it for your people, what's in it for you, your community, whatever you're going to be driving towards. Don't let go of the fact that that's always going to be important. Now, in the world that we're in today, because I talk about the make or break.
Yeah.
And the make or break is the one thing that must be done extraordinarily well throughout your organization for you to achieve your vision. And I believe that today, everybody's make or break is getting through the corona crisis the way that you want to. All right. Yeah. So that's what you're focused on. So you're literally worried about tomorrow or next week or the end of the month.
It's so interesting, Dan, because I was going to ask you about make or break, and you've hit that concept, but I like what you added about getting the make or break, about getting through this crisis that we're in. And so your make or break is a bit more immediately focused. And I love what you said about what does victory look like. And so I think if sounds like if leaders can focus and contextualize make or break in this moment with an eye toward, here's what we want to be, here's what victory looks like for us as we emerge from this. That can be, Patrick Lencioni is one of my favorite speakers, authors. He talks about rallying cries. That could be a rallying cry right now, I think, around execution.
Yeah, and again, I think right now, I would argue that just about everybody's make or break is getting through the corona crisis, for your company and for yourself, the way that you want to. And so I really encourage people to think about today. Now, once we get through this, your make or break will change. But you realize what's going on right now. There are companies out there that could go out of business during this period. If you were in a restaurant or you were, in the hospitality business or something like that, it's a horrible time right now for you and how you're going to make it through it. So what you do today is everything. And here's another thing. It literally changes every day. We learn something new every day. The programs change. Everything changes. Right now, people are thinking about how do we get back to normal? How do we re-engage? That's the big question right now. All right. Well, 2 weeks ago, that wasn't the question at all. Now the question is, how do we scale back up when the business comes back, and how are we going to do that?
Well, and so those that have been, even just some industries that have been hugely impacted. We've got some of our members that are just pedal to the floor. So it's a different kind of execution and a different kind of emerging that they're going to be looking at. But it sounds like this is one of these truths, whether we're in or out of crisis, your make or break's important. Supporting ideas like look forward activities, your forward facing dashboard, your the building of the value chain, those things still persist. You don't throw that out. Now they may change to the immediacy of the context, but those and the agility as things change, to your point, but that becomes hugely important, right?
Totally. So I've spoken to 7 Vistage groups since March.
Okay.
I've talked to a lot of people that are running companies all over. And I see both sides of that. I see companies that are doing really, really well. I see companies that are totally struggling. All right. You see both. All right. But what doesn't change for every company, whether you're doing well or you're really totally affected by this, what changes for everybody right now is the same for everybody is, are you going to come through this in a way that gives you a competitive advantage? Because here's what's going to happen. All your competitors are experiencing pretty much the same thing that you are. This is a black swan event. Nobody could have predicted. Nobody knows what's going to happen. You have to be incredibly nimble right now because you got to be ready to deal with everything. So but the reality is when you come through this, some companies are going to make the right moves, and some of your competitors who are in the same situation as you are going to make the wrong moves. And if you make the right moves, you're going to come out of this with a competitive advantage. And so are you thinking about how you're going to do that? What's it going to look like when you get through this? What advantage are you going to develop? And that's what really happens.
Well, I'm convinced at this point, Dan, and just watching not only our member companies, but also just what's going on out in the market at large. People who came into this thing at a different point because they were already doing some of the things you're talking about, came in at a different starting point, and they've had a different trajectory. Even if being hit, they've had a different trajectory than others that weren't being disciplined and weren't doing the fundamentals. And I think then as we come out, they're going to come out on a different trajectory and at a different point. And versus the competition, you talked about competitive advantage. Talk a little bit about, maybe in the time remaining, about competition. How do companies, get laser focused on the things of making the right decisions, right? As best they know, pivoting along the way. What's that look like? And what are some of the singular things that people ought to be thinking about with respect to execution and competition?
So I think it comes down to leadership. And how clear have you made it as the leader of your company that the most important thing right now for us is to come through this coronavirus situation to where we end up with a competitive advantage? All right. And bringing that to your organization in a way that they get that that's the most important thing, and they focus on that, they make that happen. Now, some of you may remember the story of Pillsbury's Van de Kamp's frozen food business. All right. I've told that story.
Yep.
All right. And this is a case where we didn't have a chance to become what we wanted to become because our vision was become the #1 brand of frozen fish in the US. But we were the distant #3 brand. And the #1 brand was almost 3 times our size. The #2 brand was almost twice our size. And it seemed like it was impossible for us to become what we wanted to become. But what we did is we figured out what mattered the most, because we did a big study, and the study told us that all the things that people really care about when it comes to fish is freshness. And we decided we were going to own freshness. And so I led that, all right? I said, this is the most important thing. We're going to do this. This is our make or break. Just like your make or break today is getting through this corona crisis, but that was our make or break. And all of a sudden, every single part of the organization focused their efforts on how we could own freshness. And so we came to own it. And our competitors, Mrs. Paul's and Gordon's, were owned by great companies, Campbell's Soup Company and General Mills. And, and for us to make the gains we did from the distant #3 brand to the #1 brand had to do with the fact that we were really clear about what was most important, because we knew the consumers cared. And they were talking about crispiness, crunchiness, tastiness. They were not trying to own the most important thing, which was freshness. Once we knew that, we all focused on that. So how do you get your organization to focus on the things that you need to get them to focus on right now? It's going to make all the difference. And that gets into the whole idea of identifying forward-facing metrics, having regular meetings. I always talk about weekly meetings, because if you wait for a month, it's too long. But today, for some companies, it might be daily meetings.
Yeah.
And so, because this is the thing, it's happening right now. And the moves that you make will change it. You're going to either come out ahead with a competitive advantage, or your competitor is going to do something better. and you're going to come out behind. And the
Well,
key is to identify forward-facing metrics, which is activities, things people actually do. This is becoming fanatical about the detail. And by the way, when I say no detail too small, I am not talking about micromanagement. I think micromanagement is mismanagement, not talking about that. You know, I'm talking about leadership. You don't even have to do it, but you want to make sure that somebody in your organization is doing the things that have to get done, excuse me, week in and week out in your company right now, day in and day out in your company right now. Are they doing those activities? And if you don't actually put those into a dashboard and track those activities, be sure those are happening every single day. You know, one day there was no PPP, the next day there was.
yeah, that's
The
right.
companies that jumped in there and got their PPP money are in really good shape. The companies that didn't, to this day, they're wondering if they'll ever get any of it. This is what I mean by every day doing what you got to do. And it's not you doing it, it's having an organization that knows what needs to get done, focusing them on it, making sure that they're doing that day in and day out in your company.
Well, I think what I'm hearing you say, Dan, it's kind of shouting out to me is this idea of clarity, and the make or break is a way to do that. And for companies that are doing those kinds of things, they're going to execute at a much higher level than those done. And because there may be somebody who is watching this, you know, that maybe not affiliated with Vistage at all at some point, but they're maybe skeptical, they may be overwhelmed. They're like, clarity? Are you sorry, clarity? There's nothing in my world that's clear right now.
Yeah.
There's some legitimacy to that idea, except the responsibility they have as leaders. And you hit the point of creating clarity. You've got to create as much clarity as you can. If you can do that, then you can begin to build around and execute around that vision of surviving this thing, emerging from it, healthier, stronger, in a position to still exist and thrive well beyond when things are in a different space.
Yeah, and actually, to your point that you just made, how important is nimbleness and agility right now?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
huge. All right. So things can change every day right now. All right. Now, I showed a video in my talk of the running of the bulls in Spain. But a funny thing happened. Instead of bulls coming out of the gates, squirrels came out of the gates.
Yeah.
And everybody took off running just like they were bulls. All right. But what happened was the squirrels tripped them up. Why? Because they were more agile. They were more nimble than the big runners. All right. So especially right now, when you think about the situation we're in right now, your ability to be agile and every day to look at what changes and your ability to respond to that is everything.
Yeah.
And so that's why I show that video. It's why I like people to see that, because it really makes a point. And a second point about that whole video is when they took off running, it was because they expected bulls, even though it was just squirrels.
Right.
If they would have stood there, the squirrels would have run right by them. You know, so the question is, are we responding out of fear, or are we making the appropriate decision based on what's going on?
Yeah, that's a perfect illustration.
So you want to get down to where you're not responding out of fear, because if you do, you'll be overreacting or you'll be frozen by it, one or the other.
Yep.
You want to look at the information, understand what's really going on every day, and then be nimble, make changes and adjustments. Be looking at it, I think, literally every day today, but a minimum every week, because that's just so important today is nimbleness. And part of what I talk about is a thing called rapid action teams. And the rapid action teams is when you see that something is working well, you do more of it. When you see something is not working well, you immediately problem solve, so that you're constantly making course corrections, staying on track towards your vision. You know where you're going, know what your make or break is, and then identify the activities so that you understand that if you do these activities today, you'll get this result tomorrow. You know, all results, they all look backwards.
Yeah.
You know, so if you look at results, it's too late. What do you do today that'll cause that result to happen tomorrow? And you identify what those are, and then get your organization fully engaged, fully involved. You know, be fanatical about the details at this point, because that's going to make the difference. If you do the right things, you'll start moving where you want to go.
Well, Dan, I'll tell you, this is as I continue to have these conversations with people, it's not so much that the truth has changed because of this. It's that we're doubling down on truth. That this is what we knew already is even more important. It's accentuated, and it's going to be the thing that carries us forward out of this. And I think that you've hit on that today when it comes to execution, understanding our make or break, understanding those daily activities, understanding the need for agility is increased more than ever, understanding those forward-facing activities, all the things you're doing. So thank you for that.
Well, just let me make one last point.
Please.
Jim Collins talks about the brutal facts.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you have this vision. You believe you're going to come out of this because you know that you're leading it right, and you know what your make or break is, and you're focusing on that. But face the brutal facts. I mean, things are happening. All right. And the only way you're going to get out of that is to look at it, know what the facts are, and then make sure that you're doing the right things that will cause you to get where you want to go. So face it and have this clear vision. You know you're going to come out of it. You know if you do the right things, you're going to come out of it as a leader, and you're going to really, in the end, have the kind of victory that you want to have. But face the brutal facts every day and deal with that, and track it. Make sure it's happening day in and day out in your company, week in and week out. You'll pull yourself through this. And when you do, you're going to have a competitive advantage over your competitors that aren't doing it the way that you are.
You bet. Well, Dan, thank you so much. I tell you, you mentioned you've spoken to 7 Vistage groups here recently. In a normal Vistage conversation, we'd have a full morning, right? Half a day to dig into all of this stuff. And we just don't have that in this medium. But I certainly appreciate what you've shared with us. If people want to know more, where would you want to send them? Where should they go to understand more about some of these ideas that you've been talking about today?
Well, I would say either call me. You can go to my website, and my website is dan@makeorbreakexecution.com.
Okay.
Or give me a call, 775-843-0517. That's my cell number. Either way. Yeah.
Terribly generous of you for your time today, but also for any follow-up where people would like. You're terrific, and you continue to invest in us, and I'm very, very appreciative, Dan. So thank you. Wish you nothing but continued health and safety and success, and we look forward to when we'll be able to cross paths again soon.
Thank you for inviting me. And by the way, what you're doing for your members by getting speakers together to reinforce concepts like this, it's a wonderful thing. And I appreciate being a part of it. So thank you.
You bet, Dan. Thank you so much.